This podcast is not safe for work and will feature movie spoilers. It will feature scenes described of a graphic nature. It will contain language which most listeners may find offensive. Welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. Hi everyone and welcome to the podcast Under the Stairs. I'm your host Duncan. Welcome to the show. Up on this episode we are continuing our countdown of the top 20 horror movies of 2024 as selected by yours truly. This is the second of a 4-part series. There has already been one video out which came out at the start of the week, which covered movies number 20 through 16. On this episode, we're looking at movies 15 through 11, and next week we will conclude the series with 2 episodes. That's right, counting down the top 10. Now, like I mentioned in the previous video, 2024 for me was a lackluster year for horror, regardless what publications tell you, and just generally what the industry made in terms of money. Yes, it did very well in theatres. Yes, a lot of movies overperformed, but in general, stacked up against other years in the last 20 years, I think it is on the bottom end, and I think history will bear me out right. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm just talking absolute rubbish. That's the fun about doing movie reviews. Everything is subjective. What is in my number 15 through 11 might have been in your 5 through 1. Who knows? And that's where the fun lies. As always, I'm looking forward to seeing your comments as to what movies scored higher for you, if my movies even made your list, or if there are movies that didn't make my list that you think are gross omissions that maybe I should have seen, or if I did see, maybe you want to know why they didn't make the list overall. So with all that out of the way, we are going to count down at movies number 15 through 11. So let's get to it. And number 15 on my list is the movie Oddity. This is written and directed by Damien McCarthy, and the movie's synopsis as listed on IMDb is: a psychic medium attempts to uncover the truth behind her sister's murder at the site of the crime. So, number 15 for me is Oddity. This is available on Shudder if you have a Shudder subscription. Like I said in the previous video, if you don't have a Shudder subscription and you want to take one on for 7 days free, maybe you want to do that and check out this movie. If not, then don't. Can't sway you one way or another. Now, this movie got a huge amount of traction in 2024. A lot of people have this in their top 5. A lot of publications have this movie in their top 5s. I think Rotten Tomatoes had it in their top 5s in terms of score. So you're probably wondering to yourself why it's sitting at 15 on my list. And it's not because I found anything particularly wrong with the movie. I just kind of felt like I've seen this sort of thing before. I'm a bit older and I've grown up watching a ton of movies, not only through the 80s, but as a kid I watched loads of stuff from the 60s and 70s, particularly those like Amicus horror movies, and this kind of just felt like a longer, darker Amicus short tale. And for the most part, it plays out really cool. The concept of a blind medium, kind of twin, I think she's the twin sister if memory serves, of this girl that was murdered, and she's going to get to the bottom of it, and she's been setting up the case behind the scenes by collecting parts that she can touch from the crime scene that allow her to get a glimpse into who might be responsible via a kind of Gollum-esque tulpa, which she brings with her, this kind of perverse totem which appears to come to life. It's kind of cool on paper. And like I say, there's nothing necessarily wrong about this one. I think the pacing works very well for it. I think the acting is decent to strong. I think The design is really cool. I like movies that have predominantly a single set location. This has predominantly a single set location, and from that point of view, it works well for it. I suppose I just kind of felt like I'd seen a lot of this before, and as a result, even towards the end, nothing sprung me as being overtly remarkable or necessarily groundbreaking. A horror movie doesn't have to be groundbreaking for me, but when you are evoking memories of other movies or specific styles of movies and not necessarily bringing your own stamp to it, that's where you kind of tread off for me a little bit. The director's previous work was a movie called Caveat, which is also available on Shudder, which I found a much more original movie. And actually, if I'm honest, preferred it a little bit more to Oddity here. That being said, I think he's a very talented filmmaker. I think he wears his influences on his sleeve, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And if you kind of have grown up watching horror movies not done like the Amicus stuff, then I imagine this probably did feel refreshing and new, and if that's the case, then I could see why this might crawl into a top 5 of the year for you. But like I say, having grown up watching a ton of that stuff, the name escapes me right now. Is it Torture Garden? Maybe, where there's literally a, might not be Torture Garden, but there's a set piece all around a kind of like a second-hand used shop, and this kind of reminded me a little bit of that. These, kind of ghost stories sprung around, being given something as the item of someone that has been murdered and breaking into a case further in there. It just all kind of leaned into a very familiar territory, which, like I say, is kind of cool, but I've seen it done a few times before. So yeah, number 15 for me, a really well put together, clearly low budget movie that has scored very big with other audiences, and that's something I can kind of get behind. But for me, overall, it was the 15th best horror movie I saw in 2024. So yeah, in at number 15, Oddity. At number 14, Humane. This is written by Michael Sparaga and directed by Caitlin Cronenberg. The synopsis for this movie is listed on IMDb. In the wake of an environmental collapse that is forcing humanity to shed 20% of its population, a family's dinner erupts into chaos when a father's plan to enlist in the government's new euthanasia program goes horribly awry. Number 14 on my list is Humane. This is the full feature-length directorial debut of Caitlin Cronenberg, she being the daughter of David Cronenberg. So that's right, you now have 2 of the Cronenberg children now out there making movies, and whilst Brandon Cronenberg seems to capture the kind of more body horror, I was going to say the kind of more nihilistic body horror tropes of David Cronenberg, Caitlin seems to have picked up a script that very much emulates the more socio-political commentary of a David Cronenberg movie, by way of also including a bit of body horror in there as well. This one made number 40 on my list because I found it really fun. Like, I found it had a wicked sense of humour at its core, and like the best Cronenberg movies, which kind of predicted where the future was going, this sort of thing is grounded in a weird level of realism that I could imagine happening. Like the population of the planet getting to such a size that governments mandate, very similar to what they do when it comes to redundancy of employment down to redundancy of life. The bit which kind of struck me as really smart and really clever is the story sets out this kind of government-led initiative which is ultimately kind of parsed out to private contract, and as soon as it makes its way into private contract, that's where corners are going to be cut to maximise profits. Once again, this movie is predominantly a single set location, has some really great performances, doesn't have a ton of money in it, doesn't need a ton of money in it. This is kind of similar to the kind of first Purge movie where beyond the kind of high walls of the house, anarchy is erupting, but we can do something a little bit smaller and self-contained within a property and bring it down to almost the kind of micro level. I found that really kind of refreshing here. I found the script a lot of fun. The family dynamics, the secrets that each family member holds was a ton of fun as the movie plays out. And ultimately where it ended was, it brought a smile to my face. I think Kathleen Cronenberg is maybe a little bit behind where Brandon Cronenberg was on his first movie, but I genuinely can see that the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. I think she's got a lot of her dad's chops, specifically around that kind of dry look at society. She's landed a really smart script that has allowed her to be very playful with that, and I'd be super curious to see where she goes from here. I think the movie did relatively well, but for me, it was one of those ones where it made me smile. Do I think it's, like I say, at the high level of an antiviral or a Shivers as directorial debuts go? No, but I've seen children, offspring of directors, come out with feature movies that are a lot worse than this. So yeah, found it fun, found it entertaining, a bit close to the bone in some parts, but that's kind of what made it fun. And I'm genuinely curious to see where Kathleen Cronenberg goes next. So number 14 for me on my list was Humane. Number 13 on the list is It's What's Inside. This is written and directed by Greg Jardine, and the synopsis as listed on IMDb is: a group of friends gather for a pre-wedding party that descends into an existential nightmare when an estranged friend arrives with a mysterious game that awakens long-hidden secrets, desires, and grudges. Number 13 is It's What's Inside. This is currently available on Netflix. It's a Netflix exclusive, I believe, because Netflix purchased the title. It did play at South by Southwest, and I think it also may have done some festivals, but ultimately Netflix is where it ended up for what I believe was not a huge sum of money, which is surprising. The director's previous stuff looks around a lot of kind of promotional work for stuff that's appeared on Netflix, so it kind of makes sense that there would be something in there that would grab it. I think he did some stuff for Cowboy Bebop, and he also did some stuff for 13 Reasons Why in terms of promotional content, some music videos. So this, I think, is a directorial feature debut. I may be wrong about that. And this one is fun, and that's, interestingly enough, quite a few movies that ended up making my 20 this year were just fun. And this is certainly one of them. This, once again, kind of has a kind of body horror-esque vibe to it. In the case of this one, you have a bunch of kind of narcissistic, kind of millennial, I don't even know if they're millennial's not the right word, it's probably Gen Z teens who are entitled and are at a pre-wedding kind of party, and they've all made a vow to come back before a wedding to celebrate in some way, but there's some accident that's caused the friendships to fray in the past, and the kind of key behind this kind of fractious relationship shows up, and he is a tech bro and has developed this game that essentially allows you to swap minds into other bodies, so a kind of Freaky Friday situation, but in game form. And what starts off, as you can imagine, with a lot of alcohol and some friends that harbour secrets, desires, and I would just say a huge hefty bill to a psychiatrist somewhere one day, turns into a kind of, it's weird to describe it, a very quick, fast-paced, very fun, very well put together romp. Yeah, I found this one a ton of fun to watch. I thought the casting was on point. I thought the dialogue was surprisingly tight. I generally roll my eyes quite a lot when kind of Gen Z speak appears, mostly because of my age. I struggled, like if I have to Google a word during a movie, then you're kind of losing me a little bit. But I found all that fun. I found the interactions really, really well put together. Cinematography and style of the movie is kind of great. Like, just like, you can tell this guy comes from kind of advertising and music video background. Is very stylishly shot, but clearly not a huge amount of money flung at it either. So he's got very creative in what he's managed to put together, and it doesn't surprise me that Netflix snapped this up. This kind of feels like the sort of movie, kind of reminded me a little bit of what's the name of that movie? This is where you shout at me. There's a time travel movie on kind of low budget indie movie that begins with a C. It's not Coercion, but something along those lines. People will be writing comments or shouting at your device. But there's movies like that come out that find their audiences like 10 years later because they exist in a place that you could always watch them, but it takes someone with a bit of clout to stumble across said movie on a drunken Saturday night and be like, this is my new favourite movie, and then the internet knows about it, and then all of a sudden it's popular. And I can imagine this kind of going the same way, that it will continue to pick up its audience. I don't think it puts a foot wrong in any way, shape or form. At times it reminded me a lot of kind of very late 90s, early 2000 kind of movies like Go or Rules of Attraction, and that kind of stylish kind of soundtrack, travelling, fast-paced talking, lots of characters, lots of interactions, flip back, time reverse. You know, let's take it from another angle. Let's see what happened here. Let's see how these stories interact. Let's see that again, sort of way. So yeah, I found that it rewarded me quite a lot for its about hour and a half runtime. It's a relatively short movie, packs a lot of stuff in there, and its ending made me smile to no end. So yeah, this was kind of easy for me to put on the list, and had I not had a few heavier hitters above this one could have maybe even cracked a top 10, and may in the future be one of those ones I look back and say, should have scored a little bit higher. So there we go. So number 13 on my list is What's Inside. It's currently available on Netflix. Number 12 on the list is Late Night with the Devil. This is written and directed by Colin Cairns and Cameron Cairns. The movie's synopsis, as listed on IMDb, is a live television broadcast in 1977 goes horribly wrong, unleashing evil into the nation's living rooms. So number 12, Late Night with the Devil, another movie that scored particularly high in 2024. This one made a ton of end of year lists, particularly in the top 5s, quite a few top 1s, and scored high on a lot of outlets as well as Rotten Tomatoes. And I can see why. This one, for me, was rewind this back, was scoring very high and was doing very well. I think the end of the movie lets it down a little bit for me, but we're going to get to that in a second. It's almost impossible about talking about this movie if you're my age and not mentioning something like Ghostwatch, which is a movie that I grew up with and I saw on TV when it first came out. And yes, it did terrify me. That idea of the kind of talk show environment being beamed into someone's living room. Difference being that the way Ghostwatch delivered things was live on national TV. Late Night with the Devil is kind of setting it in a, this did happen, but maybe you were too young to have seen it, or maybe you lived in a different part of the country and you never saw it, or maybe it just came on too late for you to watch. Sets up the first bit describing who our main character is and a bit of his background, and then you get essentially what was shown on air interspliced with footage brought in of what was happening in between commercial breaks or behind the scenes to paint a picture out. And ultimately it is a movie that descends into kind of tropish territory. I mean, this is there's someone is here that claims to be possessed. I wonder if they are. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And a kind of host who is out of his depths. Reminded me of the kind of like The Last Exorcism, where our main character, which is a kind of woefully, it's another movie where I'm not overly enamoured with the end, but as the performances for kind of 2/3 of that movie are super strong. Of a guy who has kind of seen how the sausage is made, so doesn't believe in exorcisms, and then of course on the day he retires comes across something a little bit realer than he thought it was. I mean, it has a kind of 70s vibe, even though it's kind of retrofitting a lot of things using kind of cinematography filters and stuff like that. Dialogue is all keeping in the time. It's set and has an authentic feel of something that would have been shown in that era, so I kind of love that. It leans into a kind of precursor to Satanic Panic, which is also kind of cool, and I'm with it right until maybe about the last 15 minutes, and then things get a little bit CGI, which kind of upset me a little bit. Not to the point where I was like, I'm butthurt because this movie did something I don't like. And I'm not against CGI, but I kind of, when I felt I was watching it, that a lot of this could have been done digitally. In a way where we could have cleaned it up and made it look a little bit realer. And I don't know if that's budgetary or not, possibly, but there is a world in here where we could have used some practical effects that juiced them up a little bit digitally, and it would have been better than the almost full-blown CGI kaleidoscope you get at the end of the movie, which to me took me out a little bit, because the movie up until that point is really playing with, it's not grave encounters, you know what I mean, it's playing with realism, and the performances, yes, it's just in some ways with the audio, but it's playing it as straight as it possibly can, and as soon as it breaks that barrier between what my eyes are telling me and what I know to be stuff that's been filmed on camera and stuff that's been done on a computer, that's where the disconnect came in. Still a really cool concept for a movie, and overall, it's fun to watch. It's a one and done for me. I don't think I'd ever really go back in a hurry to check it out, but it's a movie I certainly would recommend, and I've recommended it to quite a few people that I know who are maybe not kind of mainstream horror fans or mainstay horror fans, but people that occasionally dabble, that are looking for recommendations. Late Night for the Devil is one of those ones you can just throw out there kind of easy and be pleased that it will make them shit themselves. So there's, not a lot more I can say beyond that. Certainly not top 10 for me, but not one of the worst ones either. So it came in at number 12, it was Late Night with the Devil, and let's move on to our final movie review of this episode. Number 11 on my list is Abigail. This is written by Stephen Shields and Guy Busick, and directed by Matt Bellini, Oplin and Tyler Gillette. The movie synopsis is listed on IMDb is, after a group of criminals kidnap the ballerina daughter of a powerful underworld figure, they retreat to an isolated mansion, unaware that they're locked inside with no normal little girl. So the final movie review of this part of the top 20 is Abigail. Came in at number 11. Very much like I've already mentioned on previous reviews, this one is a lot of fun, and for what it gave me, which was a relatively short runtime and maximum gore and over-the-top nonsense, this is really well put together. This is the second movie I'll be talking about in my top 20 that features British actor Dan Stevens, who is excellent in this movie, but surrounded by a very fun and eclectic cast. If you saw the trailers for this movie back when it was being released, it kind of gave you a good indication of what you were going to get, and I always kind of worry that the trailer either gives me all the best parts, and as a result, when I come to watch it, I feel like something has been robbed from me, or it is kind of directing me to all the best bits of the movie, and the rest is not like that. The majority of the runtime is going to be a different sort of movie, and in a lot of respects, Abigail is kind of exactly what I said on the kind of trailer tin. But at the same time, what it gave me was stuff to wet my whistle, but not all the good parts of the movie. Like I said before, I found this incredibly fun to watch. It's behind the directing duo that did Ready or Not, and Ready or Not is, in a lot of respects, very similar to this. It's a single set location where we have, it's kind of inverse of Ready or Not. We have a character who is brought in and having to deal with things out with their control. In the case of this one, it's other people that are brought in and picked off one by one. And the glee in which this small ballerina vampiress goes around dispatching them is something that is purely a delight to behold. It's very quickly paced. You're watching maybe about 15 minutes and then we're off to the races, and it never really stops up until the credits. I found it rewarding in a lot of ways, in that as soon as it was finished, I was like, oh, I can't wait to watch that movie again, and have. So this is one of the few titles on my list that I actually did watch twice. Actually three times this year. Watched it with my wife, and then ended up watching it with my 10-year-old daughter, who also loved it. So yeah, I think it's not full of depth here. You're not going to walk out of this feeling like rewarded in a way which isn't other than just pure entertainment, which there's a time and a place for horror movies that purely entertain. This one does have a combination of CGI, which I moaned about in the previous review, but it's on a much higher level. But there's a ton of practical effects in here, a lot of practical gore, and that's kind of what makes me excited to watch it. It's a dumb, enjoyable, entertaining, massive popcorn flick, and held together very, very, very well for entertainment purposes. So yeah, when it came to organising my list, I was surprised it appeared as high, but at the same time, having watched it 3 times this year, that also didn't surprise me at all. So there we go, number 11 on my list is Abigail. So there you go, that is you. You have followed me through my 15 all the way down to 11. And in there, you got some pretty cool titles, and you got some stuff that scored much higher on other lists, whether it be Oddity at number 15, Humane at number 14, number 13 was It's What's Inside, number 12 was Late Night with the Devil, and number 11 was the movie we just talked about, Abigail, and that rounds out our back 10 on the list, which means there are 2 episodes left dropping next week, and in those 2 episodes you will get, that's right, you guessed it, 10 through 1, and then that'll bring us all up to date, and we can move forward and embrace a brand new year of horror output. As always, if you're checking this out on YouTube, please hit us a like, please hit us a subscribe, and ding the bell as well. That way you get a little notification as and when I drop any new episodes. The comment section is open below. Please let me know what you made of the movies I selected as my 15 through 11. Did they appear higher on your top 20 list? Were they lower? Or were they just like Goldilocks and porridge, just right? Or, once again, are the movies you expect to hear in my top 10 that you can't wait me to hear about, or you are maybe thinking I haven't watched? Let me know in the comments section below. If you're checking this out on Spotify or on Anchor, and the video podcast function there, once again, make sure you're subscribed. Anchor and Spotify, I think, both let you post comments. So, once again, sound off there as well. And if you're checking out the audio version of this on any of the podcatchers out there, make sure you're subscribed, and that way you get access to the almost 1,400 episodes and the RSS feed for this podcast and all future content that's coming your way. Lastly, thank you very much for checking out this episode. The podcast Under the Stairs will return on its next episode, looking at movies number 10 through 6. But until then, wherever you are, whatever the time zone is, and whatever you're up to in this big bad world of ours, please take care of yourselves out there. I'm Duncan McLeish, broadcasting live from Under the Stairs, and I am signing off.